Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. I'm also founder of the Alternative Leader Academy and author of It Begins With You. This podcast is dedicated to inspiring the leaders of today to lead with intention, both in their personal and their professional lives. My guests from across the world share their challenges, their knowledge and their experiences so that we can learn from these powerful insights to help us lead with strength, determination and compassion. Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams. Today's guest is Emma Carmichael. I met Emma while she was running a beautiful bookshop in London called Travelling Through. I've invited Emma on the podcast to talk about her work in the Balkans. Emma worked in post-conflict cultural conservation, and she said, although going out there she expected it would be about the buildings, it became so much more and really about the people. Afterwards, Emma travelled all over the Balkans, really wanting to experience them and their people. And she's written up this in her beautiful book, Driving with Tito. And who is Tito, I hear you ask? Emma also talks about her book ownership, her bookshop ownership, and how it was for her being an employer and trying to share her vision. Emma talks about her leadership, being a leader, and actually only recently reflecting on the fact that she was one. So thank you, Emma, for coming along. So, Emma, we met when I came to your bookshop to actually interview Calvin Niles for my 100 Conversations in 100 Day sort of interviews that I was doing at the time on LinkedIn.
That's right.
And as with all bookshops, I didn't leave without buying many, many books from you. And it's funny, it's always been my dream to own a bookshop. I think I have this, wonderful idyllic sense in my head, and I'm sure you'll correct me on what being a bookshop owner is really like later in the podcast. But you were talking to me about the fact that you've been reflecting on leadership and what that means to you and positions that you've been in, and that you've had this amazing, I just looked at the sort of email you sent me and was like, wow, that is a story that, yes, definitely I want on the podcast. Just amazing things that you've done. So I'm actually going to ask you to sort of bring in, first of all, your thoughts about leadership, and that reflection that you were talking about is actually, I am a leader. And then just talk us through some of the roles that you've had and the things that you've done.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary, for inviting me onto your podcast as well. It's a great honour to be here. and as I say, this is the interesting thing, because even when you asked me to be on it, I was surprised that you would even consider me, because on reflection, I the way that your podcast is structured, I had this idea that it was very much about big business leadership, and that's what a leader is. That is what leadership means. And it gave me the opportunity to really reflect on my life and to see that actually I have led in many different ways. And actually leadership, it is not only just about leading yourself, it's how you reflect, how you react and lead others. And quite often that means you're not actually leading in isolation. You're leading because you have a group of people around you, all with a similar goal, hopefully, trying to make that goal happen.
I think
and
that's
certainly with the
sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's a really interesting point, is that often we don't realize that we're leading, and actually, can we ever, in some respects, this is a question I ask myself a lot, is can we ever actually not lead? Because unless you are a hermit living in a cave, you have an influence on others, and all of that is leadership in a way.
Definitely. I mean, it's almost that you're actually reflecting the other question that I didn't ask myself. I think it's true, because whatever we do, with every decision we take for ourselves, even, we are leading ourselves down a certain path. And I think actually a reflection is an interesting thing to do when it comes to leadership. It isn't always helpful, I don't think, because you're reflecting on a decision that you took at a certain point in time, and it's very easy to forget what the parameters were around that decision. And so you take that decision that you made in isolation, and then you berate yourself, you beat yourself up and say, if only I'd done it that way, completely forgetting that what your situation is now was not necessarily the situation then. And perhaps it wasn't the best decision that you took, but it was the best of a bad bout. Because generally speaking, I was talking to my mother about this, who's about to turn 90, and she's had to make a lot of big decisions in her life, and she said exactly the same, that sometimes the decisions that you take are the right ones, but in reflection now they're the wrong ones.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, if only I had done it this way. And also it's sometimes it's not, we are not the right people to ask the question of whether we led it well, or we took the right decisions. We need to ask others, because they give us a more perhaps rounded or grounded answer to the question that we are asking ourselves. I don't know what you think about
I think that's really interesting. So one of the things that I work on with, I would say, almost every single client is about looking back and realizing that you maybe didn't make the best decision. And I always say it's down to data, that you make the best decision with the data that you have available to you, whether that's emotional, practical, whatever.
Yeah.
And so actually we could sit here and say, well, that was the wrong decision, but that's just because we have more data now. If we had the same data, we'd still think it was the right decision. So I would say, actually, if you rolled time back, you would still make that decision. It's only with more data that you can't. So actually it's about forgiving yourself and saying, well, yeah, that's the decision I made with the data I had. And that data might even be your emotional capability. It's where you're at. And I also think that we often say the decision is wrong because we've seen the future pan out, and we might let's say we blame something in the future that's gone wrong on a decision that we made. But actually, if you think about the butterfly effect, it might be something completely unrelated, that had that knock-on effect. And also, we're also only saying that was the wrong decision because kind of the future panned out that way. Whereas if the future had panned out a different way, that's how we look back and go, that was a great decision. So I just think actually we can't predict the future, and we can't change the past. So it is about, for me, what it's about is, I guess, kind of the work that I do, which is about clearing your mind of your baggage and kind of clearing the junk that almost might make you more likely to make a bad decision, so that you can be confident in the decisions that you make. And I think like with your mum, I love the fact she's so old. That's amazing. But also that she can look back and say, that was a great decision. That wasn't, because in 90 years, of course, you're going to make some that you're going to look back on and say that they weren't great decisions. So I think it's almost about letting go of that, isn't it, really?
Exactly. And also accepting another person's view on the decision that you took, that they believe what the decision that you took was the right decision rather than the wrong decision. Because generally we generally either are very hard on ourselves or too lenient on ourselves when we reflect. And the other thing is that even the decisions that we take are never in isolation by themselves, because based on the decision we take reflects on the decisions others then take around you, whatever that decision, whatever that decision you took was. So we could discuss it for hours, and still I think you never come to an answer.
No, and actually if you start to think about the impact that you have on others, you'd become lost in this sort of exponential blame game, wouldn't you, really?
Precisely. That's why I think it's so important to never see things in isolation, to see that, and also realize that it's everything, the community, the people around you also have a huge impact, your environment too, the weather, your emotions, whatever's going on in the news. I mean, all these things can have a huge impact that you forget in time that they were happening at the same time as you were taking a decision. You could have just had a bad night's sleep, all these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I'm a great proponent of that. I'm not in a good place if I've had a bad night's sleep. Definitely not. So Emma, I'm not going to start you anywhere talking about your life. I'm going to let you choose to come in, because you've done some amazing things. And so I kind of want you to offer up, what it is that you would like to share with everybody.
Okay. I think for me, it's been a really interesting exercise just to reflect back on my life. And I hope, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, and I hope that I have another 50 years to perhaps do some things differently, and also continue to explore what leadership is to me. But starting from the very beginning, I mean, going right back to when I was at 6 or 7 years old, I ended up with a collapsed lung and in a coma in hospital. And I obviously I don't remember much about it except for just sort of having this near-death experience. And I think from that very early age, it changed my whole reflection on life and what it means, and to live every day, and not to take too many things too seriously, but at the same time go into things with huge enthusiasm. And whether I've just done that subconsciously, I don't know, but that has been really the cycle of my life. And going through school, throwing myself into sports, never being a leader at school, or not being considered to being a leader because I was quite a rebel, and not really rebellious, but just thought differently to the majority. And then very sadly, my father died when I was 20 years old. And that had a huge impact. It basically pulled the carpet from under my feet. And once again, I was in that situation of never thinking that I should plan, because if you plan, it may not happen. So to live for the day, basically, live each day as to the full as much as you can. So I came to London. I'm an Edinburgh girl, from a Scottish girl originally. Lost the accent on the way, but came to London. And the first few years, yes, were really difficult because I didn't know a soul. I was very different. I was green as grass, and just took a job in London, which sort of got me on my feet and first signs of independence. And then I went off and travelled. So that was the first time where I was suddenly out there alone and having to lead myself. Again, leadership came into play. And some of the things, when I reflect back, I wonder how I actually survived. I mean, I put myself into some really ridiculous situations, and something, things could have gone hugely wrong, but they didn't. So this is again with leadership, and when you're looking at what you do in life, the people around you, believing in the people around you, that they are generally genuine and good and working for your best interests, and just getting on with life themselves rather than all bad people, changes your perspective on how you approach life, I believe.
I think that's really interesting because your kind of near-death experience as a child, it's fascinating to me because it actually rings true of a client I was talking to yesterday, but also for myself. So I had my first daughter, I was just 17, literally 10 days past my birthday, and I hemorrhaged very badly and very nearly died. Was sort of literally half an hour away from it. And I think, like you, actually, I've always kept that sense of, I'm lucky to be here. And actually, even on a really difficult, challenging day or a challenging time in my life, I think, okay, but hang on, I'm 48 now. And actually, I might have died at 17. So I've had all of these experiences. And I think when I meet people that have had similar things, they either go one way or the other. So they either completely stop planning and just, like you say, have that one day at a time thing, or they plan everything with a kind of, right, I must do all of this stuff. Which I think probably was the way that I went. But I do understand that sense of, right, okay, I need to get on with things. I can't let things lie. And it definitely, it definitely impacts around you. And I had a bit of a health scare in August last year, and was lying in the hospital, sort of being told I might have had a heart attack or might be about to have one, and was thinking, okay, what's unresolved? And I'm quite good at having, resolved things because of that experience at 17. And I'd actually not spoken to a friend for about 10 years. We'd gone through a really difficult situation. And I reached out to her and said, look, you would actually be my kind of deathbed regret. Can we kind of have a conversation, even if we don't repair the friendship? But actually we did repair the friendship, and we now message each other every day almost. And she's become as close to me again, if not closer. than she was then. And so I
Yes.
think it is interesting actually to pause and reflect on your life. You know, where do those moments take you?
Absolutely, and also from that example that you give, it just shows that quite often the way we view things in our mind and how perhaps we think the other person has viewed it, and therefore we haven't been in touch, has long passed and dissipated, and whatever it was suddenly doesn't actually mean anything, and it's ridiculous. We think, how did we leave these things for such a long time to resolve? And that's the sad part of people who have that, who are in that situation, and but equally it's also a relief that there is hope that you can resolve.
And I think for us, and it's an interesting thing. So we kind of stopped being friends. I know we kind of slightly off topic here, but it's an interesting thing around the kind of leadership really, is that, you know, we stopped speaking in our early 30s around a sort of death in there was a sort of a death involved, and you know, and how people coped with that. And we both said, when we sort of had this conversation, we said in some respects there's no point us talking about what happened, because that's a version of ourselves thinking about that, sort of making decisions. It's a version of ourselves from kind of, you know, 15 years ago. So actually we'd almost be having a conversation trying to remember what we felt as ourselves 15 years ago. And actually maybe if that situation happened now, neither of us would feel that way because we're now nearly 50.
If I could just add into that, because I think that's also a really interesting point, because the way we see things and way we have interpreted what happened and what that person meant to us, especially when you're younger and you haven't had many experiences, you believe everybody's interpretation of that person and the relationship they had with you would be the same as they had the same relation with the others. And what is quite eye-opening and is to recognize that the relationship I had, for example, with my father was not the relationship my brother or my sister had. And therefore, as a result, their reactions were very different to mine. And at the time that can create anger and make you more upset, because you can't process that on top of
everything else,
of death and bereavement and all the rest of it. And nobody tells you that, no, because everyone else is in shock or whatever. And I find that's another thing with age and with experience, you learn these things. And when you're younger, you don't recognize these things.
No, you don't.
And as a result, you can lose friendships because of that.
And I think actually that was sort of one of our big learnings, you know, obviously both of us growing up and growing older, was actually recognizing, actually I, you know, looking back now, especially now with my training, I would have a very different understanding of what was going on for her. And actually, you know, she has an understanding of what was going on for me, which she actually just wasn't able to get to at that point. And you're right. So actually it was a rather lovely conversation, because we kind of said, this has happened in the last, you know, 13 years. We jokingly refer to them as the wilderness years now. And, you know, we just almost sort of picked it up. And there were, I think, 2 points. I just said, I need you to understand this and this. And she said, yes, and I'm sorry. And I need you to understand this. And we kind of went, and let's leave it. Because it was picking up the friendship that was more important. And I think in some respects, when I was writing my book, you know, there were almost kind of 3 key ideas that I really wanted it to get across. And one of them was exactly what you have just said, which is that reality is our perception, and it's not the same as everybody else's. You can't find anybody else in the world that would have exactly the same perception as you. And therefore, actually, if you hold that knowledge, not only as a person, but as a leader, it means you don't prejudge too quickly. You don't jump to conclusions. You don't fall out with people who are different to you. And ultimately, leaders should be surrounded by people that are different to them. We all should be. And so then actually you have those relationships because you respect, great, this person has a different view to me, rather than, oh, that feels alien and difficult.
For sure.
Sort of leading on from that, you know, one of the things that you have done, and do forgive me if I'm jumping ahead, do feel free to say, no, I'm not there yet. But you've worked in kind of post-conflict situations. And so I found that really fascinating when I read that. So, you know, do feel free to kind of come up in your timeline to that.
No. I think the conversation is almost jumping. So I mean, I don't need to talk about that can be for another conversation. But Yeah, so basically I came back from traveling, and I trained as a building surveyor in conservation, and worked in London for a while, for 8 to 10 years, and then had this opportunity to go to the Balkans, working with the Council of Europe, involved in a post-conflict project of cultural heritage, which was very much about bringing communities back together. Post-conflict raises all sorts of issues, particularly regarding religion, differences of opinion, communities who fought against one another, and particularly in somewhere like, and it's political, very political, and the so as I was saying about individuals and in a post-conflict situation is firstly understanding, somewhere like the Balkans, ex-Yugoslav countries, is understanding where they're coming from. And I came out there very naively, thinking I was leading a project dealing with the conservation of buildings that had been damaged by war or by conflict. But in fact, what I was leading was something far greater than that. I was leading a project in which individuals had gone through something very traumatic, something that I have never gone through, and equally people that had been divided by the fact that they were Albanian or Serbian or Croatian or Bosnian, and how you deal with that, having never had any experience of that before. And I'm quite a practical person. I am, underneath the chaos that is me, I am actually quite practical. And when it comes to individuals and having understood death from a very different perspective, death, bereavement, in whatever form it is still, it affects your emotions very much. And it was having an understanding of that in its wider context, but also understanding when you're dealing with a project like a conservation, a cultural heritage project, is the dynamic between individuals, and that they really wanted to get on as much as they could to do something good for their community, to bring people back together, because essentially from Yugoslavian times, everyone was very, very mixed. Anyway, they were from different backgrounds. They were all Yugoslavian, but since after the war and everything, they had to decide whether, well, before that actually, they had to decide whether they were Croatian or Bosnian, or and some didn't want to have to make that decision because families had both Bosnian and Croatian or mixed religion and heritage within them. But one thing that came out throughout the whole project that I was involved with was their humor, and how they were able to, in moments of complete stress when we had to make big decisions, someone would tell a joke against the others,
right?
But because they all understood their kind of humor, they'd all be rolling around with laughter. I wouldn't have a clue what was going on, because it was never told in English. It was always told in their own language, and there were translators in between. And you had to let this happen, because it was like a tension breaker. That allowed them to then say, okay, go off. I'd say, okay, let's have a timeout moment. They'd all rush off out to the balcony, and they'd smoke about 10 cigarettes between them, or each, and then come back, and they'd come back with decisions. And that was the way they operated. And sometimes this comes back to leadership too, about leading in another environment to which you're normally what you're familiar with. In the Balkan world, suddenly they were faced with having to embrace European standards, transparency, and a completely new way of working from their way of working, which was communist-based working mechanism. So a lot of the things they were being asked to do, like tendering documents, looking at the criteria and deciding on who was the bids and everything, was alien to them, or the approach to it was new. And for me to be able to do my job effectively meant being able to understand their approach, how they did it, so that I could communicate, well, this is the way the way it has to be done now, because the money's coming from Europe. But I could only do that by understanding from them the way they ran their projects. And it was a slow process, I have to say. But one thing I certainly gained from that was the importance of ensuring that everybody agreed around the table. And if one person didn't agree or had a problem with it, we thrashed it out until either they changed our minds or we changed their mind. So going forward, so it was quite slow in some ways, but it meant that we went forward as a unified group of people. And that was a huge learning curve for me too. But when you're in it, you don't realize you're leading. You're just trying to find a way to make a project happen, to be facilitated in a bigger environment in which there are so many international organizations there, all willing to give money, but also be a part of a project's success, particularly when it comes to community building and post-conflict, and sort of what's the word? Not restoration, reparation, and But I mean, there's a lot to be said for why we are there and how long we should be there, which is another debate all in itself. Yes, it's another podcast. But from the leadership perspective, it's also understanding your limitations and where you have to let go and let others almost take the leadership off your hands.
It sounds, I mean, it's really funny, as you've been speaking, the word beautiful sort of kept coming to my mind. It sounds like a beautiful experience of being in that environment, difficult, challenging, but very beautiful, in watching human beings coming back together and finding that path and finding that way.
At the time, I wouldn't have used that word.
No, I can imagine.
It was frustrating. It was because the politics involved meant that there was constantly a change of members to the main committee that was making the decision. So you were always having to start from zero and having to rebuild something that you'd built between a mix of people. But I think the word I would use was humbling. And also it was a privilege to have had that experience and to see life from a very, very different perspective than I had ever experienced in the UK. And we forget that when we're born with our UK passport, well, certainly before anyway, maybe not so much now, but
another podcast.
Yes, another podcast. That the privileges that you have as a result of being born here rather than in the Balkans is you don't realize those until you're suddenly in that situation. And also the whole perspective around how community matters so much there, family matters, just being able to give and to provide for your family and for your community is the priority. And whether it was just because I saw that post-war, that it was more intense at time, but I think not. I think it's very, very strong that family matters in a way that is possibly been lost quite a lot in this country, and we're more a disparate group of people, whereas there extended family also.
That's amazing.
So it was humbling. So I would say it was a very humbling experience and a privilege. And there are a few of us who came as a Spanish guy, a Swedish lady, another Spanish woman, and we get together every other year when we can, and we talk about it, because no one actually understands the experience that I went through there, but they do, and it's a relatable topic that we can talk about and laugh about and cry about and all, be frustrated about. That here you can't, because that's where leadership actually it is also quite interesting, because when you're at the top or you're leading, I see a number of friends who've been leaders of big institutions, and they're alone.
Yes,
quite often, and they cannot be friends with the people that they're working with, and I think that's so sad. And maybe that's just one form of leadership, or maybe quite often they're thrown into these situations of leading having had no experience, and they're just flying by the seat of their pants, basically.
I think it's interesting that you say that. One of the things that I do is run a group for people who are top of the company and don't feel they can go to anyone else. And obviously I see a lot of those clients one-to-one, but actually bringing them together to share, knowledge and experience that I don't have. And to, like you say, to just feel they're not alone, because actually in some respects there does have to be a separation, because they need to hold, I always liken it to a parent and a child. It's a family, that actually the parent shouldn't share everything with the child, because they would wobble the child and give them too much information overload. There should be a loving, a good connection. But actually the parent needs to speak to other parents, or to therapists, or to doctors, or to whoever it is that they need. That there's that kind of, I always call it the upward system, that you should always be working kind of upward. But it does leave people feeling alone, and that's exactly why I developed my group. But I must I wanted to talk about your book, because we were just talking about your book Driving Tito, and yes. Driving Tito, it's something with a celebrity, and I said to you, who's the celebrity here? And you said, well, the car. So tell us about that journey and about Tito.
Okay, so the book came about because after 4 or 5 years working in the Balkans, I had burnt out. As usual, I had thrown myself in, 24/7, and there just came a point where I knew if I didn't leave, I would either never leave and therefore just burn out completely, or it was seriously starting to affect me health-wise, mentally. And that there had been a bit of an incident where I had been mugged in Pristina as well, and where nobody came to help.
Gosh, okay.
And it was an eye-opener that I was a foreigner in a world that didn't really want me there. And that's, I don't say that in a bad way. I just say it's recognizing my time was up there, and recognizing this wasn't my world. And therefore I have to make that decision, because nobody's going to make that decision for me. So, but I had another 18 months before I did eventually leave, and I left again, just very highly strung. But during the time that I had been in the Balkans, I had seen these cars, they're called Zastavas, so they're a bit like the Italian Cinquecento. Well, in fact, they are based on the Cinquecento. And all the older generation of in ex-Yugoslavia drove these cars, and they learnt to drive them. And the stories that came from these cars were all stories of enjoyment, of happiness, going to the beach, racing the cars. But now the majority of the cars that I saw were in fields, or they were just rusted relics, basically. But there was still enough around. I thought, well, I'm not ready to come back to the UK. I've had this really intense experience. If I come here back to the UK, or it would be like cold turkey, and I know I couldn't do it. I needed to find a way to see the Balkans in a bigger perspective. And I thought, well, why don't I try and buy one of these cars, see if I can find one. And everybody thought I was totally crazy. And it did take a while to find one. And I had my Zastava finding committee, which is made up of, because some of the people that I was working with who spoke all the Serbian, Albanian, and a bit of English too. And eventually I found a car that was roadworthy enough to get me at least out of the town. And I just set off with this vague notion of traveling full circle around the Balkans to get the bigger perspective, to get away from that the cloak of being part of an international community, and seeing the world for what it was. And the experience that sort of unraveled itself was humbling, and it was also it was a little scary at times, but generally speaking, in this car, it was the hero, and I was just the person driving it. And I thought, when I was driving it around, so I went through Macedonia to into Greece, through at the tip of Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania,
Wow.
through into Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, and then back. The snow then came, and then I ended up back in Macedonia. So I had this vague sort of idea of where I would go. But basically, because the car went so slowly, I could only go uphill at 20 kilometers an hour, and it would overheat regularly. I had to jump out, put bricks behind the back wheels, and then let the steam out, because the engine was at the back, not at the front. The petrol tank, the massive petrol tank, at the front. I mean, now looking back, I think, gosh, highly dangerous. But the fact that I was, they say here on the road, don't travel. It's more dangerous to travel too slowly than it is to travel too fast. Well, I had no option but to travel at zero speed going uphill. But everywhere I went, cars would beat their horns, children would wave, and every time I stopped, I'd be surrounded by people who wanted to know about the car. And the further away I got away from Macedonia, the more of a hero, a celebrity, the car became. And to the point where I got to a northern part in Serbia, and I reached this little border, and it was just like a hut basically. And the off of the border patrol guy came flying out of his little cabin, running towards me. I thought, oh my God, is he going to shoot me? What have I done? And he went, it's a miracle, because he couldn't believe that I had managed to drive this car so far. And he was looking in the end. I was there for about an hour as he asked me all these questions. But what was so lovely about that experience too is, as a woman traveling by myself, was a sense of understanding of a world that perhaps I would not have been able to experience if I had been with other people. And yes, at times it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it's again, it's a realizing that people generally are genuine, and they're good. They're there to help. They're not there to do you harm generally. Of course, you meet the unsavory characters. They're everywhere in the world. But you rely on your instinct and hope that is enough to see you through experience, through the experiences that perhaps are not so enjoyable, or to give you the sign that get out of here, and acting on that. Because I think that's the thing that we as human beings don't always respond to, is our instinct. It's the last thing we respond to, but I can manage this, and our ego takes over, rather than saying, no, get the hell out of, sorry, should I swear?
No, that's fine.
Get out of here fast. Even if you could be wrong. But my instinct is always self-preservation. I want to live another 50 years. So if instinct says get me out of here, even though it's probably absolutely fine, I will find a way to get myself out of the situation.
So. I believe strongly in instinct, and I think one of the things that I say to people is that, it's about kind of clearing up, so that instinct is really sort of hot on the nose. It's something you can instantly trust. And I always say to people, I see a lot of people who have, maybe slight PTSD symptoms, so that instinct has gone wrong, and actually it's about cleaning that up, so you can trust it. And I always say to people, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't want to go in, you don't go in. I remember I used to be a family worker in Cambridge, and I used to go and visit a lot of families. My boss always said to me, because it just meant randomly going to people's houses, and nobody really, looking back, we did start to talk about sort of safety necklaces, where you press the button. But I had nothing like that in the beginning. And he always just said to me, if you ever pull up anywhere and just think, no, he said, just don't go in, I'll back you. I was so lucky to have someone like him. But I think, yes, I always say, in fact, I think it's an analogy in the book, and I talk about it like a telegram. that you get a telegram from your body and you get a telegram from your mind, read both of them. If you read both of them, actually you've got kind of double the power. Sometimes your instinct is a bit off and sometimes your mind is a bit off. If both of them are saying, yep, this does not feel right, get out there as fast as possible. So, and you wrote a book, didn't you, about your travels?
I did. I mean, it only took me 10 years to write it, I have to say. But the reason being that by the time I had come back from the travel, so the book's called Driving Tito, Through the Balkan Backroads with a Celebrity.
And where can people get it?
So you can get it online. You can find it. You can order it in Waterstone, any of the bookshops.
Okay.
I don't think it's readily available in the bookshops because travel memoirs, there's not much space on the books for many travel books. Yeah. But you'll be able to find it in most places, and it's on my website as well, travelingthrough.co.uk. So, and I can give you the links for the show notes as well.
That'd be great.
And it's £9.99 for the paperback, and I think it's £5.99 as an ebook, and you can get that anywhere in the world.
Lovely. And can I just ask, why Tito?
Well, because it was so small. So it started off as being El Petito, and then it became Petito, and then it became Tito. And it seems natural to be called Tito because of the link to ex-Yugoslavia and President Tito. But I didn't actually refer to it as Tito while I was traveling, because the link to President Tito had mixed reactions. Some people loved him, other people hated him, so and that wasn't the idea. It's just but yes, for the book, it's
fabulous. And so we haven't got a lot of time left, but talk me through the bookshop. How did you come from driving around the Balkans to owning a bookshop in London?
Okay, so this has been a dream. It was a very, very long dream that I'd had for many, many years, from traveling days. Really, I've done a lot of travel in my time. Still a lot more to do. The world's a big place. But one of the things I always had in mind was to have a bookshop for travelers. And while I was going around or actually in working in the Balkans, it was almost my go-to place when everything got too much. I used to dream of how the front window would look, and I'd have a chair in the window and a lamp, and that did materialize. So and having books and travel books, everything related to travel, whether it was fiction, non-fiction travel writing, to explore the writers around the world and places around the world, either through fiction, as I say, or through travel memoir. And when I came back from Europe finally, and I wrote a first draft of the book. Actually, I wrote the first draft of the book while in Sarajevo. I went to live in Sarajevo for a year afterwards to sort of decompress and recalibrate. And I thought, right, it's time to come home. It's time to come back to London and make myself stay for at least a year, see whether I can be here again. Anyway, and during that time, I worked on the idea of finding a bookshop, and I found this beautiful sort of place, little street called Lower Marsh, full of little independent shops. And I thought, this is the place. This is where I need to have my bookshop. And it took another 18 months in total, I think, till I found a place and opened Travelling Through. And initially, it was a bookshop with a little cafe downstairs and a little garden out the back. And then I opened a bar within it as well and had events. And it was an experience of leadership, which I didn't realize I was having, where I had to take on younger staff, young people who were students, and so it was a completely different experience, because I had a vision of what I wanted for the shop, which I couldn't share with them. They couldn't. No, they loved it, but they couldn't see what I saw. And so my challenge was to be able to find the way to communicate what I wanted to them in a way that they understood and would act upon. And it was frustrating at times. I had a couple of staff who were just brilliant, who just understood the concept. I could just leave to do whatever they wanted, and then others needed more guidance. And that is the nature of leadership. It's actually, and I recognize that you have to understand them, understand what works for them, to be able to then give them the right tools or the right communication so that they can deliver what you want them to deliver. And it's as much about you as it is about them, and finding those right people. And sometimes the people are just not are not right for you, and there's nothing wrong in that, but it's recognizing that too. And sometimes we try to make it fit when it just doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that shared vision, really, isn't it? How do you share and inspire?
Exactly. And that's where I see, so I was in a luckier situation because I was in charge, basically. But you see in larger organizations where, I have friends who've worked in leadership roles, and they're having their staff have been there for a very long time and they're not going anywhere. And how do you lead in that situation? Now, admirable for those who actually managed to make it work, but it's that's a tough one. And how you resolve it in a way that you get the most out of the person, and also doesn't leave you frustrated and cross at the end. I always think of it at the end of the day.
I always think of it as finding that person's motivation and then working out where the crossover is between whatever they're motivated to do and what you're trying to get them to do. If you can't change that fit, how do you do that? Because actually, I remember working with a senior leadership team in a school, and the head said to me, I just have a real problem with the deputy head. We are chalk and cheese, but we're going to work together for the next 10 odd years. It was really clear they were both going to be there that long. And actually what I did was individually break it down with each of them, their passion, their dream, their vision. Oh dear.
You're right.
Yeah, I haven't got any water in here. Hang on.
Oh no, I've got some here, but I can't pass it to you.
Yes, pass me the water. So I broke it down with them individually, and then after that, what I did was then bring them together, and we talked about their vision, their dream. And actually the vision and the dream was the same. They both wanted the best for the kids in school. They just got to it in a different way. And actually when we were almost able to kind of draw a different map and say, okay, so you're coming this route, they're coming that route, but you're actually ending up at the same destination, they both relaxed and accepted each other, because they didn't see the other person as pulling against their vision, but actually just coming a different route. And they really started to appreciate each other. And I think in leadership, that's what we need to do. Is it's kind of a bit back to that perception thing, accept other people's differences. But I always say to people, they will be motivated to do something, even if it's going on holiday. Find the motivation, find the link, and you'll be fine. It's fascinating. But
no, it is. And actually the other thing from the bookshop was actually, for me, was humbling but also very inspiring, is that the community around the bookshop, the people who lived in that area, who just embraced the bookshop and loved it, and would come in. I sometimes I'd be there and by myself, and somebody would be downstairs wanting a coffee, and a customer who I knew would say, "Oh, look after the bookshop." They saw it as a moment of fulfilling a dream for themselves. So I'd leave them in charge and go downstairs and make a coffee and come back, and they loved it. And that the again, it was afterwards. So when you're in it, you don't necessarily see it. And I know it was chaotic, and my staff must have got so frustrated with me at times, because I didn't always have the vision. And you're making it up as you go along, because it's what they didn't understand, and perhaps that's because I didn't communicate it to them, was that I'd never run a bookshop before. So it was a huge learning curve. But when I threw myself into it again, and this one thing you talk about at the start is about how do you do all these things? How do you lead and still have a healthy life balance? And for me, that is the huge challenge, which I have not yet managed to master, I have to admit. So the bookshop is now no more, sadly, but from it came the podcast, the Traveling Tito podcast, which I've now which you were on the other day, and will be live shortly.
I fully recommend to people to tune into it. So that's Traveling Through, and I take it that's on all the sort of normal podcast platforms.
It is from Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all the ones. I'll give you the link for that. Sure. But what has come from that also is again understanding what it meant to them, what the bookshop had meant to those who visited it, which I
Mm.
never saw. So to see the other side and recognize that, okay, financially it
Yeah.
was a total disaster. I mean, if anybody looking at it wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, but from a experience of emotional experience and a person to person experience, it was huge. And from that point of view, it balances itself
Yes.
out. And I think sometimes
Yeah.
our idea, I suppose this is from my point of view, is what our expectations of what leadership means and the goal may sometimes be something very different to what you wanted it to be, but it's actually better, and it's brought more rewards to whatever you were doing.
It's interesting. So I live in a sort of smallish village outside Cambridge, and we have a bookshop. So it's completely, I don't know who owns it. It's completely volunteer run.
Right.
It's filled with secondhand books. It's all, I think it's all secondhand books.
Yes.
But it's a kind of hub for the village for people. So they do sort of, very small kind of mum and baby mornings. It's sort of in the center of the shop.
Yes.
And people can go in and have coffee. There's sofas there. It's a place for, if you're feeling a bit lonely or a bit on your own, and you can get some wonderful cheap books in it. And I've always thought we were incredibly lucky to have that resource within a village of, there's probably only 10 shops in the village, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful kind of community. It's completely there for the community. It's not run as a business. And I think often that's the best bookshops in some respects. I mean, yours just had, almost, I would say, like a movie like quality to it. It was small, and it was lovely, and the little outside space at the back was gorgeous. And I think when you build from the heart, it really does go into whatever you're building. So I think it was beautiful. But yes.
I think that's the thing about business is what are you running a business for? Are you running it just for profit, which is what we're brought up to believe, or are we running it for on more of a social as a more of a social business basis? And sometimes, I mean, I went into it thinking I was going to do it for profit, but actually, on reflection, I'm just reading a book, and I realized it was more of a social business without the funding. But there we go.
Yes, you would love. I recorded yesterday a podcast with Anna McAfee, who started the LinkedIn local hosting groups. And she's all about community. So when that launches, I'll let you know. I think you would really, there's a lot of crossover between the two of you. We must come to an end. I know that you need to go as well. So I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions that I ask all guests. So thinking back over the challenges that you've been through, is there a book, film, or piece of music that helped or really resonates with you from that time?
Okay, so I just had a very quick think about this, and excuse me, I'm now losing my voice.
Right.
One of the books that I read as a child, I don't know whether it's even available now, it's called Paddy, the Next Best Thing. And it's written by Gertrude Page. And it's set in Ireland, and it just reflected me as a child, as growing up, and her father dies. And that has a huge resonance with me, and her relationship to her father. And that's that has had a huge impact on me. In fact, I've got to find out my mother's bookshelf because I need to read it again. I haven't read it for years. And as a film, I just literally 2 days ago on I had Amazon Prime and the new Anthony Bourdain film called Roadrunner, which is a reflection or almost like a biography of his life, which made me cry. But for me it was very thought-provoking and about life as his life as a chef, and then as a TV star, really, through travel and food, and yet loneliness, how loneliness was always there. I mean, he had addictions, but one of the messages that come across from it is you're never alone. It's whether and I think that's the message that comes from them, is that he could always have talked to us. But I think sometimes when you're in that situation, you don't know how to talk to people. And I think that's something that we as individuals must recognize, that people are running around, rushing around, and have no time for us. But if you reach out to the right to the right person, somebody that you have
Yes.
confidence in, they will stop and they will
Yeah.
listen. But you always think people are too busy and you
Yeah.
don't want to bother them.
Yeah.
And that's how the darkness can get
Yeah.
darker. And
Yeah.
it's recognizing that in yourself
Mm.
and being able to have the courage to reach out and talk.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. My
So,
second question is, if there was a tip that you could offer people, whether it's a thought tip or a practical tip, something they could do today, what would it be?
Oh, okay. I would say I'm not very good at looking in the. I mean, people say look at the mirror and say, this is your day. I'm not like that. I think is just be comfortable with the decisions that you've made, and don't beat yourself up about them. Learn from them if you must, or just accept them and move on, because life's there to be led, and each day matters. So go and live for each day.
Yeah, that's lovely. And my third one, if you were standing in front of the world leaders today, what would you say?
I'd say stop working in isolation and start working together.
That's lovely. Okay, Emma, thank you so much for coming on. It's so lovely to talk to you, and I really enjoyed being a guest on your podcast too. But thank you for returning the favor and coming on.
It's been absolutely lovely. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been. I'm halfway through your book. It begins with you, and I've still got more to do, and it's been really, really useful for me to reflect as well, and to sort of. So yes,
great.
to all us leaders, alternative or otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I love traveling autobiographies. They're one of my favorite books, so I'm going to order a copy of Driving Tito.
I will send you one, Mary.
Oh, thank you very much. I would love that. Literally, I love traveling. Thank you so much, Emma. I'll let you go because I know you need to get off, but thank you.
Okay, have a very good day.
Take care. Then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mary-williams.com. That's www.mary, which is MARI-williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.